This week, I'm joined by Barrett Morse, the Chief Strategist at the group, USC MBA, and all-around awesome guy. We talk about how he learned to love information architecture and how you can combine your clients' business objectives and your web design. Stick around. Welcome to episode numero 15. I am your host, Jose Caballero, co-founder and chief creative officer of digital agency, The Group. Every week, you ask business, creative, tech, and marketing questions, and myself and our guest experts answer those questions. Welcome to today's show. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you, Jose.
Thank you.
I'm very excited about today. We are doing the Web Design 102 series, and I wanted to let you know that you can join us live at ustream.tv/thisweekin. You can also join us on youtube.com/thisweekin, and you can always tweet me at Jose Caballero using the hashtag TWI Web Design, TWI Web Design, and please subscribe to us on iTunes and rate our show if you like it on iTunes. Joining the conversation again is our freelance creative director Ari Guimon, who embodies the type of creative that our guests, that our viewers like you are. And you've worked on a lot of different projects as diverse as City Search, Iowa World.
Right.
Right now you're working on phase 2 of Focus World, which you shared a bit ago.
Focus World, there's a Social Stay, the startup. We had Seth
Social Stay.
last week, I think it was.
Last week?
Yeah, you know, a lot of startups and also some big name companies.
You're pretty busy right now?
Yeah.
Awesome, that's good to hear. I want to get started by introducing our guest today. We are talking about information architecture, and we're going to take it a little deeper than we did before. And to give you a little bit of background on our guest, I'm going to bring up his bio, and I know him fairly well. I know that Barrett graduated from USC, from the MBA program there, and emphasized on new venture development as well as marketing, and has a BS from USC also in accounting and information systems. Dude, are you a bigger nerd or what? Prior to USC, he actually also worked at Arthur Andersen. Prior to his MBA, he worked at Arthur Andersen, Ernst & Young as consultant, and founded Music Union, and is a key partner at the group and one of my mentors. Welcome, Barrett.
Thanks, Jose. It's very good to be here.
You're a busy guy. A lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, it's that time of year.
Excellent. So, in our conversation earlier, I asked you a little bit about your background and how you transitioned into the digital space, and our viewers really like to know how people get to where they are and what they do. Can you give us a little bit about your background and how your MBA and the systems and the real dorky stuff led you to where you are today?
Sure. I think where I ended up today is a series, like anyone ends up, it's a series of opportunities that you have to open yourself up to. When those come around, take them, run with them, and see where it goes to. One of the hardest things is actually just taking the opportunity and leaving what's very comfortable. That said, I started my career, as Jose said, in a large glass tower in downtown at a place called Anderson. And I am now much more happily involved in doing product development and digital work for startups and venture capital companies and for foundations and large national creative organizations. How I got here, other than having beers on the patio and having an opportunity to present itself, has been really following what I'm passionate about, and that's creating systems. Helping things become more simple, helping them become more efficient, and creating businesses that provide value back to their end users, audiences, consumers, but also to the world as a whole.
So that sounds really, really wonky, and I love it. It's one of the things that makes us great partners. And just to explain to the viewers, Barrett and I started working together in 2005, and as a creative, I was at a certain point in my business, and I had the lunch today with a creative, and I told him a little bit of the story, where I was able to get my business to a certain degree, my web design practice, and Ari, you're at a stage
I'm going through that right now,
similar to where I was in 2005. And one of the things that I learned very quickly from you was convergent thinking, versus a lot of ideas and a lot of the things that you brainstorm in multiple directions, how to define and focus ideas to move forward. And even as we make fun of it, the idea of having whiteboards in the business. And the question I got asked today was, about being a consultancy versus a graphic designer, and I told the young man that I was having lunch with, about my age, so it sounds weird that I'm calling him the young man. But I told the gentleman I was having lunch with that I consider myself a consultant, even though I am a graphic designer, and even though people know us for our creative work. So it's interesting because you come from a consulting background.
Right.
And one of the questions that I have for you at a very personal level is, how is it working with creative people? How is that transition from, well, here's all this way you communicate, you have all this structure, and I'm somewhat more familiar now with the MBA program at USC.
Right.
Talk to me about the transition from the MBA to the creative and to the user experience, from evil to flaky.
I got to be honest, it's probably one of the most incredible transitions that someone can go through, is to really play on both sides of the brain. Initially, coming from a background that was very structured, information systems, everything is very well documented and rigorous. Accounting, finance also was my second degree in that. It's been a very pleasant process to go and be able to explore, but then also to marry the idea of exploration, of divergent thinking, of how can we really open up the sky, what can we imagine, then actually taking it down into concrete points of action while building consensus along the road. I think the most important thing that I've found in that journey is always having a clear sense of why I'm doing something, who I'm doing it for, and then actually defining what it is that we're doing as a third step into it. Very often I see my clients jump into what they want to do. They've got long lists of specifications and features, and they want to have a button that goes and turns a light on and halfway around the world. But there's no audience for that necessarily, and there's no purpose, there's no inner relevance to that necessarily. And so
relevance is something that you help us as creatives build. And I was bringing up on my computer something that you put together for our conversation. One of our viewers asked us to put together a checklist that as a freelancer, he didn't necessarily do all the things that, we might do as a consultancy, and if we can check off like the different steps that we take. In our first episode 101, we went over, what architecture is, and with, had the overview of it, but now we want to get a little bit deeper into the practice. Can you walk us through, and you can see it in the monitor a bit, what these steps are that we go through, especially up to the user experience before we start developing? And the question I want to answer today for our viewers is why?
Right.
Why all this process? Why all this stuff? I know one of our past collaborations, someone would call it fluff, which was a fascinating kind of conception. Tell me a little bit. Go through this checklist, starting with product definition. What are the different things that steps that you go through in your process?
Sure. The reason that this exists, if I can actually give a little bit of background to this, why I created this flow here. As professionals in the industry, we often find ourselves in our roles. It's kind of circular. We do our role, we do it again, we improve it, but it's a very circular process. Our clients, they don't see things that way. They actually see things in a linear process. They're starting today, and they've got a vision to the future.
They got deadlines. They've got launch products.
They've got investors. They've got the holiday season.
They got to make money.
They've got to make money. They've got to stay in business. And what this does is translate the process that we take as professionals and actually show it how it unfolds, like unrolling a red carpet, so to speak, to a client that's looking at where they want to get to.
So this is a roadmap that you're showing a client.
Yeah, absolutely.
So bring it up my screen and so that we can share that with our audience. So let's start here on the left, the product definition. So I'll zoom it in a little bit.
You'll see here there are 8 large red macro categories. Those are the steps that we will take always along the way. Below that, there are a few examples of activities that I might do with a client. You can do as many or as few of those activities as are necessary. We start with product definition. That's really to understand the why. Why are we doing this? What's our reason for doing this? Why are our customers having this need for us? Who are our customers? And then what are the features that we can develop for them? Once that why, which is the brand, the customers, the audience, and the what, which are the features, is developed, then I can take the process and branch it off into information architecture.
So that's really the customer, Mr. Customer comes in, or Mrs. Customer, and you go, why are you doing what you're doing,
Absolutely.
and where do you want to go. If it's
Right.
a bread company, you can do it. If it's a software company, you can do it. If it's a nonprofit, you can do it. You know, and product is a very defined and specific term. What we're referring to there by product is whether it's the website, the product, or whether they have a product they're selling, that you're trying to define it versus it being amorphous. And I think that one of the challenges that I've seen that we have often is having lack of clarity with anything that you do, you know, specifically with a client.
You have to ask the right questions.
You have to ask the right questions.
Right.
And what challenges do you see, Ari, in your practice? Like, give me an example of something that's happening right now where there isn't any clarity and you're like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big part of it. I think a lot of what we do is so subjective that you kind of try to map out these steps so you can always fall back and say, you know, the decisions we made are because of this consensus that we reached in the previous step. When we define what the users were, when we define what the product is, this is why we're doing things a certain way. So you don't have a client come to you in the middle of the process and say, none of this works, you know, like these abstract kind of, you know, things that sometimes people say, like, I don't like it, it doesn't work. Like, why exactly is that?
Why does the feedback, so a client can't just say, I really don't like this design.
Right, and if they do, that's probably because you didn't ask the right questions. You're not going about the process the right way.
So you're saying that if you're a good designer, you know, aesthetically, that defining something, and this gets into the information architecture, getting deeper into it, because traditionally, as a solo web designer, you're doing information architecture and the design, even though you might not call it information architecture, you're putting things in specific ways. And again, as a goal today, I think as an inquiry, as a question is, how do you decide what you do on the site and how do you get there? And back to this checklist that you provided in product definition, you know, brand definition, customer profiling, product definition, competitive audit, all this stuff. If I'm a freelancer, pick only 3 things. Only 3 things that I should do, like Barrett's rules of user experience, to help my client define their product.
Absolutely. The 3 things that you must do with a client is to define the brand, to profile the customers, and then to actually create the product definition as a result of the stories of those customers and the story of the brand interacting together.
So one of the things that, and there's a diagram in this workbook that we have here that exemplifies that a little bit. Before we started this journey and before we started this process, one of the things that I knew how to do at Razorfish was do creative briefs and do brand work, do brand definition and some abstract things. But we had account people and strategists that gave us the business goals and that played a role in the architecture, and then an architect touched it, and then my team, the creative team, got it. And so we get these wireframes and these schematics from the architect. We're like, what?
And
we
we
weren't involved.
That's actually a really good point, and that's a question I would ask. Like, you guys seem to be talking about it from like a larger project, kind of collaborative process with a lot of people. Like, for somebody who's alone at home, like, why would you go through this process as opposed to just sitting there and starting to like wireframe or design a page? Like, what would be the benefits of it?
It's a really good question, Ari. I think the impetus for many people is to just jump right into it.
Get tactical and just do it.
Just go.
Right.
The reality is this: just jumping into something is kind of like running through a field in the dark. You don't know what you're going to run into. You could run off the edge of a field into a ditch, onto a road. You have no idea because you just panicked and kind of ran.
Right.
The 4 hours that you would spend, or 6 hours, or two half days that you would spend defining the product out, will save you days, weeks, perhaps even months in the actual launch of your product. Because the most inefficient part of any product cycle, in my experience, has been when people waver with their decisions. The uncertainty, what are we doing, why are we doing it, let's try this, let's try that, let's try this, without any purpose behind it. You end up walking down these endless product development cycles or design cycles, or you deal with clients that change their mind. If you have a client that changes their mind all the time, that's your fault.
Right.
Because you have not worked with them
to
actually define out the objectives of where you're going to. A project is like climbing a mountain, right? You've got a peak to get to. First thing, pick what peak you're going to climb. And then, not many of us can do the whole Superman fly, leap tall buildings in a single jump type thing. You take small steps up that mountain, and you reinforce those steps when you're mountain climbing with pitons and rope. You reinforce those steps in a project with check-ins and sign-offs.
Right.
And by breaking things into small, manageable pieces, then you build an incremental story, really, for the development of your product that allows you to be very focused and very efficient on your way through.
I really like the metaphor of mountain climbing, and something you were saying earlier is like if you fall off the cliff, you have that little peg.
You have the last milestone from the previous milestone. You don't want to go back to the beginning.
You don't want to follow
that. That really sucks. And it has happened to me very many times. And I'll share something very, very much about the beginning of the group and some of the things that I know that I did well and some of the things that I didn't do well. You know, the one exercise or the one thing that I really took away and that we did fairly well as a business, as a consultancy, as a design partner, as a web partner, even in the early stages when we were very few in the network, was doing the user definition. So we knew who the users were and we were always talking about it neutral. So from my point of view, the one thing that really has helped, regardless of this bigger framework or of this bigger process, is simply saying, who are we designing for? And that's why it's called user experience. And can you share with us, Barrett, just a little bit how this story got created for stockbrokers?
Sure, absolutely. So a user story consists of 4 pieces. Their demographic, which is how you would describe somebody.
So this quadrant here on the left on my screen.
The top right, actually.
The top right is a demographic. So this is the right. Go ahead.
And those things are things that you would normally see in a business plan or someone that might have an audience profile. That's where typically I start from with a business because they have some idea of that demographic that they're looking for.
So where they live, their age, their income, who they're married to.
Exactly.
PTA membership, that's a really good one.
As we work through that, we move to the left quadrant, top left quadrant, and then I look at with the client in the room together. This is a collaborative exercise. What is the story of this person? Jumping into their skin, channeling them between everyone's life experience. You typically know someone or have a conception of someone that fits that demographic. So you tell their story. What are they?
So that's a good question. You brought up an interesting point. If somebody asks you, how the hell did you come up with these people?
Yeah.
Like, did you just make this stuff up?
Sometimes a lot of it comes out of experience and understanding different how the industry is segmented to it. A lot of it comes from just general research. Part of being in this profession is just being able to read what's latest on blog sites, follow what's going on in the news, know what's going on, in the macro events of the world. And staying informed.
So staying informed about the macro things, and like quoting the Wall Street Journal doesn't hurt in the middle. Oh well, the Wall Street Journal says this about this particular industry. But what's interesting and what I feel that it's a gap in our practices. If I'm a designer, I might be good at design and at creating really great web experiences and the narrative and the photography selection and the typography selection and all these really great things. But I might not be great as a consultant, or I might be shy. I might not be able to draw out from a client all this information. And in a lot of cases, and I had a scenario where someone mentioned that a design firm, pure design, like just design tactically, asked them to make sure they brought all their strategy with them, that they weren't going to really touch that.
Yeah.
So what I experienced personally for me at Racerfish in the 90s was that for the first time I saw this union between business, technology, creativity, and marketing, even at some degree, playing a role in the product, in the development of what we did. So it wasn't graphic design, and it wasn't pure business consulting, and it wasn't, it was this new weird hybrid thing.
You're solving real people's real problems and challenges. If you go down to the bottom of this, actually, and this is where
I think he's beating me on how many actuallys between Barrett and I. I've already done 3. So here's the goals and objectives.
So taking our user story and looking at what they're trying to accomplish as a goal, and then finally prioritizing those. Here you'll see 2 things that are bolded and italicized. The most important thing that you can do
you have to choose priorities. So the most important thing that you do, is to choose 3. Like I would just say, hey, let's do all of this stuff.
Can't do it. You choose 2 or 3 top things. You can always add stuff later.
Okay, so you tell that to the client, that this is not permanent. This is just. Have you experienced where the client changes their mind?
Absolutely.
And what do you do then?
Depends on the reason for the mind change. If it is something that maybe the market shifted, they have to react differently to the product, then we need to redesign the product, and that's fine. If there is a mind change, we can use this as a piton, as a step in our process, and then go back to this step, preserving everything that we've already done, and then rework from there. If it's a mind change that is irrational, and those do happen sometimes.
All the time.
I have clients that will just say, I want it green. Why? Because green. That's not a real reason. You take that, you actually have these user profiles, you take them back to the user profiles, you take them back to their business goals and say, okay, you've changed your mind, great. How does that mind change compare to your users and what they need, and your business goals. And what
so
those
your
are.
users have did your users change is the question.
And I think that's a really good point. Ultimately, this isn't about you or about the client.
No.
You're designing this for someone else.
Right.
But the client might think that they know everything about it. And I've seen clients walk in with a list of all the features that they want.
Feature-itis.
Everything that they have on the site is huge, and it's not even tied to budgets, which is a whole different conversation that we're going to cover before I caught myself, before I said, actually, we need to have, somebody throwing stuff at us. The ability to tie the budget to the site and to what the business objectives are is something that we're going to cover at our Group Skool seminar, the third portion of our Group Skool seminars that are coming up. A series is starting at the end of this month. The question, again, going back to the mind changing, I heard it from our audience, from one of our audience members, that one of the main challenges he had was that his clients would change his mind, and how does he control the overall framework? I also heard this from a development partner, that how do again, we are good at doing the thing that we do, at design, at development, at other things, and not necessarily at managing the client's expectations, and that's what you have account guys. But I will be blunt, an account guy at an ad agency doesn't have the strategic skills unless they have an MBA, and there are some. There are some. But traditionally, in the traditional media culture of an ad agency, and I'm going to say this out loud, and you can send me, a hate mail, that ad agencies today are not equipped to deal with the reality of what designing for the web is. Creating a campaign is very different than touching the P&L of a freaking business.
Totally.
If you're going to have now, if you're in a startup and you have direct access to the CEO and you have all these things that are tangible to the P&L, that's different. So the reason why, and I'll get off my soapbox, the reason why I had you today as our guest, very specifically to the question, and this came up in a conversation between you and I, and it wasn't that there was a polemic or that there was anything negative, but the challenges that you've had in the past over the last 6 years, and we've been collaborating now for almost 6 years, is in dialoguing with the information architects on projects. Information architecture and user experience comes sometimes from the point of view of the user and of best practices, and they are the conduit for the majority of my experience between the business goals and the ultimate result. And we're going to show a little bit how this resulted into the site that we did. But it always requires very experienced executives and team members who speak each other's languages to have the dance. So talk to me about that.
What you just said there is, in my experience, the most important thing, having a common language. And by taking small steps, like a user profile or like a user flow, you then unify the language amongst your technology, business, your marketing, your creative teams. You want to keep it simple. I at one point in my life, liked very complicated, numbers-heavy things. I've been reformed. I don't do that anymore. A simple language that everybody can understand, if they can take that and execute that well. The challenge that I had actually was how do you define that language across different constituent groups? How can a designer understand who the person they're designing for as well as the business? And really, the business, by the way, is just another user. The business should not be seen as this separate entity that sits up here on high and the users are all down here. A business is part of that community.
So that's an interesting, so you tell me that if you say that if at a minimum all you do is do a user profile, and you really define who you're designing for, and the business is one of them, and a person within the business is one of the profiles. So you might have Joe user, a Jane user, and then you as a business, as a user, and what your needs are from the site. That might help you flesh out if you find out what somebody needs and you can deliver that to them, then suddenly your client is a lot more malleable to that, and it smooths out the process. And I have on my screen Stork Brokers, which is the scenarios that we were sharing. And between us, I want us to look at this and try to pinpoint, and I am logged in, I think, but try to pinpoint from what and again, I want to say thank you to Jason Kalkanis from This Week in Startups. He introduced us to this client, and we have permission to share some of this with them, and it's a live site now. But they've done a great job at launching the site, great job with both the development and the user experience. We did the user experience portion, and Nathan, what's Nathan's last name? Nathan Maffio, big shout out. He did a great job on the .NET development. Nathan Maffio?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a cool name.
Yeah.
Could be
Very gangster.
Nathan Mafia. So tell me a little bit where the user profiles helped here, and knowing the user helped here in the flow.
Do we want to start from the homepage? Do you want to start on the product
Sure,
page?
let's start at the homepage.
Okay.
I'll go to the homepage.
So our user profiles were very simple. We had people that wanted to sell products, people that wanted to buy products, and parents that needed information. We distilled our user group down to those just primary 3 elements. As you see right from the beginning on the top center of the header, sell, shop, learn.
So I'm going to be the devil's advocate. I could have told you that like from the beginning.
Sure.
Like that's as simple as it's like, duh, yeah, that's really simple.
Now,
Why did this whole process, was it even necessary?
when we started this process, those users weren't even defined. In fact, this site, I'm not sure if you are familiar with this, but this was a rebuild on a previous site.
Yeah.
And the previous site,
familiar with that.
The users themselves at that point were very information heavy. They wanted all the information about tips and tactics and this and that. So those 3 things are very simple. They should be. You look at an iPhone and you have one button and it's simple because it should be.
Do I need to do user profiles or user scenarios or stories to do that? I mean, give me a break. I have to design this shit. I don't want to have to, sit here and make, crazy.
I mean, I think it helps.
I want to make stories up.
It helps tell the story, exactly.
So it helps tell the story. So if we look at it from the point of view of a story, and what you're doing is almost like building a script. You have to build characters first. You know how I would say it to make it like more to simplify it for not just our audience but for ourselves. I look at it sometimes as I'm a filmmaker and I have to create these characters and walk the user through it. And a quote directly from the CEO of Stork Brokers was, when we were done with the process, that's awesome. It validated, what I was thinking. So the person was thinking it, it got put on paper, it was clearly defined, it then went to wireframes, and there was absolutely no question and clarity as to what needed to get done. There was prioritization even at the beginning as to what was priority for this first release, second release.
Well, something that's interesting here, this site could very well be like eBay. Now, if you look at eBay, it's got a million things going on it, and it's great for what it does. What our opportunity here was to simplify that user process down to just the bare necessities of what a user needed and what the business needed. And that's important because A, it helps the user find what they're looking for, it makes them happy, and B, it keeps the business developing really effectively and cost effectively and efficiently time-wise. A lot of problems that I see happen, especially in startups, is that there'll be way too many features. And so when we talk about having just a few things that surface, that comes from those early steps and prioritizing those things and being limited and really taking, if we look onto the needs section, limiting ourselves to only having 2 or 3 things that are of top priority to any user.
I think that's a really good point, and I think something that would be interesting to share is how, when you approach a client and you tell them you can't get everything you want, how do you handle that when they're like, well, what do you mean? Like, I have to have all this stuff on my list. Like, what do you mean I'm not going to get it all, at least for the first phase? Or how do you handle that?
Personally, I handle it as a story, and it depends on the client. There are some clients that are very analytical, and in that response, I can very quickly show them how the top 20% of their features, which is usually 2 or 3 or 4 features, account for 80% of the site's traffic. Pretty easy to show.
So it's the 80-20 rule, Pareto principle.
Pareto principle.
Cool.
Some people don't like the numbers idea to it, and so they want to hear more of an experience, and really liken it to your life. In your house, it's nice to have things clean, nice to have clean experiences. To have something that's got a million things on it makes it harder for you to experience someplace. It makes you work, and you're not going someplace to work harder. You go to work 8 hours a day to work. You want to use a product to actually make that simpler and make it more enjoyable.
So the user experience process and information architecture sounds like it's a way to create a dialogue about who the users are and create the stories that define the features. And going back to my screen and in the last few minutes here talking a bit about the different users, one of the things that I want to talk about is that what I've discovered, and this is my personal, and Ari, you tell me, and if that's true or not, and if just to talk directly to our users, to our viewers, I just called our viewers users. That's really funny. One of the things that I've discovered is that the process, in the workbook, and I think my power is a little bit low. That's why it's going. Let me connect here so that it stays in Keynote. One of the things that I discovered is that doing this workbook in itself, just doing the work together, regardless of what the documentation and regardless of whether we knew or they knew what was going to get done, just doing that process together, it builds a level of consensus that is good. So the three takeaways from me, and you're going to say something, Ari?
I think something important too is that it shows you're taking leadership of the process, and I think that gives the client a little bit of, you're not just walking in there with nothing, you have like something already laid out and you're going to lead this process with them.
So that's a really good point. So to our viewers, the client is going to see you as a resource and as a designer, and they have a specific expectation of you. If you begin behaving as a consultant, let's use the word consultant, more and more, and helping facilitate the process, even if it's just a little bit.
It increases your value.
It increases your value.
Yeah.
You can charge more.
Yeah.
It also increases your pain in the ass and your headache. Either you're a production resource and you're doing great work, which I wholeheartedly endorse. Do great work, just do it, and you're doing it for an agency and you're figuring out these problems. If you're working directly with a client, startups, like we work with a lot of startups, you have to have this. And I mentioned Adaptive Path, and I mentioned some of the other very UX-focused firms that we compete with. And what we bring to the table, and I'm speaking about me and about the group and about our network, about you guys, is really ultimately the creative aspect to it, combined with the business aspect, which at the middle is really user experience is the cheese. And one of the things that, and I'm going to just spend a minute, for our viewers, please go to groupskool.net, GROOPSKOOL.net, and read about in 10 days here in Los Angeles on the 29th, on the 30th and the 1st, the 30th of April and the 1st, we're going to have the first group Skool weekend workshop. It's a web weekend workshop, and it's going to be 2 days. It's going to be myself on Saturday with 2 brand strategists, and on Sunday we're going to spend time with Barrett and a few other information architects talking about and going through the same process that we go through. And the process isn't anything necessarily mysterious. It's a user experience process in a very visual form that really helps you with your clients. If you're an agency, the same with the clients, and also if you're an executive in a company. This process, I think, helps almost any design process, whether it be for the web or whether it be for the physical world.
Right. Definition and picking a priority to focus on is the most effective way to actually get to a result. If you cannot pick a path, and a very simple one, you'll spend time just running around in circles, and it can get really frustrating. But time is a completely unforgiving mistress. You don't get her back. It's once it's gone, it's gone. And the budgets are the same way. And the faster, the sooner that you can define that point, that one user need that's critical to meet, then you can focus all of your resources, all of your page real estate, all of your technical programming on the smallest, on solving the smallest set of most important problems. That is much more valuable. Solving a small set of highly important problems is much, much, much more valuable than solving a broad set of not important things.
Not important. That makes complete sense. So the Pareto principle, 80-20, information architecture is a tool to help you prioritize and to help you get consensus with your clients. Of course, you have the manifestations of it in the wireframes and the sitemap, etc. Good architects are great listeners and people who interact with their clients and who extract out of them those answers. Next week, we have another exciting show. Ari and I, and a special guest, we're going to talk about how do we apply the business principles that we've extracted into the visual form. Can you go outside of just, hey, this is my style? Can you begin applying different nuances from the story that you're creating about the user and the story that you're creating about the brand into the visual? And how do you do that well? You know, is that a skill that you can put into a workbook, or is that? And Ari, you and I have been talking about this. Can you crowdsource? Right now, 99 Designs is super controversial within the design community. You can crowdsource design. Can you crowdsource the design thinking? You know, that it goes into this. So join us next week for the second part of this series, and it's going to be intermediate visual design, and we're going to talk specifically about how to combine the business goals with the design aspect of it. Thank you so much, Barrett, for being here. I wish we had more time to continue discussing this. Ari, thank you as always for the great questions, and we will see you guys next week, same time, same channel.